Welcome everyone to the ECG CRASH course. Today we'll be going through AV nodal blocks. So just a quick recap of the electrical conduction system. So the signals of the heart start at the sinoatrial node, which depolarizes and sends its action potential down the atria, depolarizing them, forming our P wave. That signal then reaches the atrioventricular node, which holds onto that action potential, forming a physiological delay, which is represented by our PR interval, which is measured from the start of the P wave to the beginning of the QRS. The AV node will then send the electrical signal down the His bundle system, down each respective bundle branch, depolarizing our ventricle, forming the QRS. The whole thing repolarizes, forming the T wave. For this topic, we're really interested in the PR interval, and we'll see how that varies with each AV block. With regards to AV blocks, there's three types: first degree, second degree, and third degree. So we'll go through those now. So what is a first degree AV block? So a first degree AV block is defined as a PR interval greater than 200 milliseconds, and it is fixed. So what's 200 milliseconds? So each small box on an ECG paper is represented as 40 milliseconds. 40 times by 5 is 200, which is also one big box. So if you have a PR interval greater than one big box or 5 small boxes, that is first degree AV block. And what do I mean by it's fixed? Well, if I get my pen out, so if this is the PR interval measured here, this PR interval will be the same PR interval for each consecutive beat. So measured from here to there. Oh, that's gone a bit too far. So measured from here to there. Each one of these PR interval for each beat has not varied. It stayed roughly the same. I think if you measure this one out, it should be around about 280 milliseconds. So this is first degree AV block. So now we move on to second degree AV block. Second degree AV block is split into two types: Mobitz type 1 and Mobitz type 2. We're going to go through Mobitz type 1 first because it's the more complicated of the two. Mobitz type 1 can also be called winky back because of the person who probably discovered it. So what is Mobitz type 1? So Mobitz type 1 is when you get PR interval variation with each consecutive beat. So if you're to measure out the PR interval here, which this has actually measured out for us, but I'll just measure out again, we can see that the PR interval is getting progressively larger with each consecutive beat until you get a P wave which is not conducted down to the ventricles. And then this is followed with the PR interval shortening again. So why does this occur? So this occurs because the AV node with each consecutive beat becomes slower. It becomes more rubbish at conducting the electrical impulse down. And so its laziness is represented by the PR interval getting longer until it gives up, and it has to give itself time to reset. So we get a failed conduction down, but that rest period has then given it time to recharge, where it can now conduct the next available P wave down. So that's winky back or Mobitz type 1. So that's just a description of what we're seeing. So we call these P waves that haven't conducted dropped beats. Here's an analogy for anyone who finds analogies useful. So we have this person here who's passing boxes to this person here at, let's say, specific rate. So this is the sinoatrial node, this is the atrioventricular node, and this van is the ventricles. He's passing the boxes at a certain rate, and this person here is going, eventually with each box he gets really tired. Eventually he gets so tired that he drops one of the boxes, which is that drop P wave, but then the next box that this person is ready to pass on, he'll be ready to collect. So that's an analogy if anyone finds them useful. So let's look at second degree AV block, also known as Mobitz type 2, or I like to call it the ratio one, and it will make sense when I go through it. So secondary AV nodal block is intermittent failing of the AV node. It usually has a pattern. I just want to show you an example first. So we'll go through this example. So there's intermittent failing of the AV node, and there's usually a pattern or a ratio to how many cycles the AV node fails, and the PR interval is fixed. So if you use this example here, we've got the PR interval here, and we can see that it's conducted down, and we get a QRS, but then this next beat didn't conduct, so we get a drop beat. And then this next P wave, we can get the PR interval again, conducts down successfully, and then the next one doesn't conduct, and the next one conducts, and the next one doesn't conduct. So there's intermittent failure. This PR interval, if you were to measure it out, doesn't vary from beat to beat. So that's what I mean by the PR interval is fixed. And it's in a 2-to-1 ratio of failing. So this would be called Mobitz type 2 with a 2-to-1 AV nodal block. In this example here, we can see a P wave and a QRS, and then a P wave that's not conducted down, followed by a P wave that has conducted down, and another P wave that has conducted down, and then two P waves that haven't conducted down with another P wave that has conducted down. This is also AV nodal block, Mobitz type 2, but it's a varying Mobitz type 2. So here it's conducting down in a 2-to-1 fashion, but here it's conducting down a 3-to-1 fashion. For each 3 P waves, only one of them conducts down. For each 2 P waves, one of them, for each 2 P waves you get, one of them will conduct down. I hope that makes sense. So it's just basically illustrating that you can have varying AV nodal block in second-degree AV block Mobitz type 2. So last but not least, we have complete AV block, also known as third-degree AV block. So this is the big bad of the AV nodal blocks, and that's because the AV node has completely failed. There is no signal going from the top to the bottom. Yeah, so there's no electrical connection between the atria and the ventricles. So you'll see something called AV dissociation. And the reason why you see AV dissociation on the ECG, as well as bradycardia, is because the atria are basically doing their own thing and the ventricles are doing their own thing. So this is illustrated nicely on the ECG here. So the atria are going at a completely different rate to the ventricles. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that could be a PR interval. There, I apologise that it's in red, even though the ECG is really red. Let me see if I can get a better colour out. You might think, well, there's a PR interval there because that must have conducted down. But when you start to look at the other P waves, you can see a missing QRS there, a missing QRS there, and you could argue, okay, maybe that's some 2-to-1 AV nodal block. And then you see this QRS kind of on its own, and you could argue, oh, that's just a really long PR interval. However, when you can either get a piece of paper out or you can get calipers out, when you start to map the QRSs, you'll begin to see that there's actually a hidden P wave there, which is superimposed in the QRS. So the QRS has basically superimposed itself on that P wave, so you can't see it. And actually everything begins to match up. And you can start to see actually the P waves aren't associated with the QRSs at all. And if you're to map out the QRSs, they go at their own rate. And if you're to work out the atrial rate from the P waves that you've mapped out, you get a rate of 78. And if you're to work out the ventricular rate, you get a rate of 33 beats per minute. And go back to red. So this is AV dissociation, when the atrial rate and the ventricular rate don't match up with each other. So the atria are doing their own thing and the ventricles are doing their own thing. So why is that? So the the ventricles go at their own rate because you need to think back to your basic physiology of pacemaker hierarchies. So normally the highest pacemaker hierarchy is the sinoatrial node. which is the boss of the heart's, what rate the heart goes at. However, if this doesn't work, the atrioventricular node or the his bundle pacemakers begin to take over. And if they didn't work, then a pacemaker somewhere in the ventricle would have to take over. However, so that's why you don't, that's why you get this bradycardia occurring. But a consequence of a lower hierarchy pacemaker taking over in the heart and manning that intrinsic conduction is that the rate becomes slower. So instead of going at 60 to 100 beats per minute, you begin to go at 40 beats per minute, which we would call a junctional rhythm, because it originates at the junction of the heart, the his bundle area. And if you were to get a ventricular pacemaker takeover, we'd call that a idioventricular rhythm, which usually goes at a really slow 30 to 20 beats per minute. So that's why you get that bradycardia occurring, and that's how you get the ventricles doing their own thing. Here's another analogy. So we've basically snipped the cord between the atria and the ventricles. So the ventricle has no clue what the atria wants, so it basically does its own thing. So this ECG shows you an example of when the hierarchy pacemakers, so the ones down in the ventricle or the junction, don't take over. We get just a row of P waves here. So you just get a massive row of P waves, a massive pause of basically no conduction in the ventricles at all. So this massive pause we call ventricular standstill, and it's a consequence of actually a hierarchy pacemaker, so a lower hierarchy pacemaker not taking over. So we don't have a idioventricular escape rhythm, we don't have a junctional escape rhythm supporting the patient's own heartbeat basically, and this would cause someone to collapse. And if someone was to have a complete heart block, this might be the reason why they could be in cardiac arrest, is because they've got no underlying intrinsic rhythm. So what's the treatment for that? Well, the treatment for it is a pacemaker. So just a quick overview of pacemakers. We put a lead in the right atrium and a lead in the right ventricle, and basically what a pacemaker does is it remakes that AV synchrony by sensing electrical activity in the top chamber and then waiting for an intrinsic ventricular response to occur. Once that, we set basically a timer for the intrinsic rhythm to occur, and if it doesn't occur in that time, the pacemaker will generate a heartbeat for the patient itself by depolarizing it, and that's seen as a spike and followed by a QRS. There's a separate video on pacemakers if you want to learn more about them, but this would be a treatment for someone with complete heart block, and in some instances of secondary AV block, specifically Mobitz type 2, that ratio one, we may also use a pacemaker as well. So now we're going to go through some practice ECGs to test your own knowledge. Feel free to pause the video. The answer will come up in 3, 2, 1, 0. So the answer for this one is winky back or second degree Mobitz type 1. Well done if you got that right. If you didn't, let's go through it. So here we can see the PR interval. We can see the P wave followed by a QRS followed by a T wave. I'd say the T wave is particularly quite long in this one. So we can see the PR interval there. We can see another PR interval. And we can see that PR interval looks slightly more longer than that one if you were to measure it out. And then we can see this PR interval is slightly more longer than that one. And then we can see that this PR interval is slightly more longer than that one. So we can see that there's PR interval variation. And then that's followed by a drop beat, so there's a missing QRS there, followed by a conducted P wave, which has a short PR interval again, where the AV node has resetted. So that's winky back. So this is our second ECG. Feel free to pause the video. The answer is coming up in 3, 2, 1, 0. So this is an example of first degree AV block. So if you were to measure out the PR interval, that would be roughly 340 milliseconds. We can see already it's bigger than one box. And you can see that it doesn't vary for each consecutive beat. So this is an example of first degree AV block. Well done if you got that right. And then our final ECG is this one. Feel free to pause the video and work it out. The answer is coming up in 3, 2, 1, 0. So this is complete AV block. And if you worked out the atrial rate, it's roughly 75 beats per minute. And if you worked out the ventricular rate, it's going at 30 beats per minute. So well done if you got that right. If you didn't, let's go through it together. So try to find P waves that are consecutively occurring together. So we can see a P wave here that's clearly not conducted. We found a P wave here that looks like it might have conducted. However, we're not 100% sure. And we've got the P wave here, we've got a P wave here, we've got a P wave here. So at the moment, we're thinking, oh, could this be a really massive first degree AV block, or could this be a 2-to-1? Because it's not, it's not convention for, first degree AV block to be that long. Could there be actually a P wave buried somewhere underneath here? And if you were to look closely, there is a P wave buried in that T wave somewhere. That T wave has superimposed itself on that T wave. That T wave has superimposed itself on the P wave. And if you were to have a piece of paper or some calipers, you could map out that actually these P waves, there's probably a P wave somewhere buried in this QRS, actually map out. And you can see that. So if we were to take it from here, you can see here quite nicely, these P waves sort of map out roughly together. So that's showing some AV dissociation. We have an underlying bradycardia as well, going at 30 beats per minute. So there's an idioventricular escape rhythm with this one, which is why we don't get that horrible ventricular standstill. So this is a complete AV block. So thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it useful. Check out my other videos for the ECG, about other ECG stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one.